people a little piece of paper, like Stanley Aronowitz got there on opening night, to remind him to be a little briefer. You know what it's for, and it's in the interest of everybody having a chance to speak in the second half of the program. So I'm going to introduce people as we go along. You have the flyer or the book. You know that we've got 5 folks. Our first presenter is Brother Cal Winslow, who is a labor historian, longtime activist on both coasts, the author of a great book about the union that John's going to be talking about, the new National Union of Healthcare Workers, co-editor of another terrific book, Rebel Rank and File, about labor insurgency in the 1970s. And Cal is going to start off giving us a little bit of context for the recent encouraging resurgency of union militancy in the healthcare industry. Brother Cal.
Well, I'll try to be very short. Ellen just asked me to set a context. I'll just try to do that. I think we're always hopeful that there'll be a labor renewal, that we're on the verge of something happening. And this last year, 2011, was interesting. Madison, Verizon, and so forth. So we have to be hopeful, but a long strike at American Sugar, a big strike at Verizon, 43,000. But in context, I suppose it's important for us to remember that in 2011 there were 19 strikes, major strikes, 19 major strikes with 1,000 people participating. Now that was up from the low point, the doldrums. Can you imagine we've lived through this of 5 in 2009. 5 strikes. So in terms of the context then, just to keep our feet on the ground, and I guess this is what I was asking to do, our last big insurgency, by comparison, in the 1970s, in 1970, compared to 5, there were 381 major strikes. And that's not so far off from 1974. There were 421. And then these figures are comparable to the big strike wave after World War II. So I guess I'm just saying, really, we have a bit of a ways to go if we're going to catch up with that. You know, in the 70s, there were major strikes in coal mining and longshore and trucking and railroad and construction and auto. In teaching, I might say, in teaching, which is something that I don't think we really pay proper attention to in our book, but there is a chapter there in teaching. There were hundreds and hundreds of strikes, and that's really how the teachers' unions were built, from the bottom up, a grassroots movement. David Montgomery, in his book, Workers' Control in America, made the point in 1969 that it was now commonplace to see teachers being trucked off to jail to serve time because, and they built the biggest union, for better or worse, which continues to be the biggest union, and they're still one of the most densely organized of all occupations. So that's something to remember about the 1970s. One of the things also looking back on it, which I don't think we emphasized as much, is where there was a union leadership which was not standing in the way of the rank and file rebellion in that time. Fantastic things were possible, namely in the public sector and amongst teachers. Where there was a roadblock, like in the UAW, things were very difficult indeed, and that's one of the things we talk about as the rank and file challenge and rebellion of the 1970s. There are all kinds of different strikes. I think the idea of the importance of the strike is coming back today after a period of time in which people actually argued that maybe strikes were a thing of the past. We didn't need to concern ourselves with them anymore. In the 70s, of course, there's every imaginable kind of strike. Strikes, wildcat strikes of coal miners every summer in the middle of the 70s. 99% of the coal miners' strikes in that era were wildcat strikes. Striking safety, striking for the right to strike, striking for lowering productivity. They actually did lower productivity. So lots of here in the city, older folks will remember when the drawbridge workers walked home with the keys and tools and left all the bridges up. The printers did the same thing.
1974.
Yeah. The printers did the same thing in Washington, D.C. They went home, there was a panel on Luddism. The printers went home with all the key parts in their pockets. And so there are lots of different kinds of strikes, and they weren't always the greatest strikes. The 1960 teacher strikes here in the city are nothing to be proud of. A strike essentially against the black community. The big General Motors strike was manipulated, apparently, according to Bill Sarin, who exposed this, manipulated to cool off the auto workers, to get them to cool their jets. What seemed like a massive, long strike, you know, the actual intentions of the union were quite different than the interests of the... So there are lots of different kinds of strikes, and of course the decade came to an end with the disaster at Patco, which I suppose should remind us that not all strikes have glorious conclusions. I think Tim, unfortunately, can tell us that that might continue to be the case, that strikes aren't always the answer to everything. Out in the West Coast, we're getting regular calls for a general strike now every other day about everything. And you know, I don't know if that's really, you know, going to help us. But what stands out in looking at last year, 2011, is the resurgence of healthcare and hospital workers. But I don't know so much of how much of a resurgence it is. John and the others can talk about that, because really, UHW, NUHW, they were striking right through the 90s into the big strike in the 2000s at Sutter, other strikes around the country. So it really, you know, how much of a resurgence that is, I don't know, but it's certainly important. And so if you go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics today, right at the top of the list, you'll see that as a big strike this year, the strike at Kaiser-Permante, Sutter, of NUHW members, joined by the California Nurses Association and some stationary engineers. One of the, well, the second biggest after Verizon, strike of the year at about 29,000 workers. And I was able to participate in that, and then the second strike, the same size in January. Really fantastic, very inspiring movements, I have to say, of healthcare workers and nurses, and certainly a sign that there's, you know, fantastic potential amongst hospital workers and nurses, and it's something that we really ought to be paying attention to. So I think really I wanted to say that just just to go back to the 70s, though, once again, I think this is a good book worth looking at, but we certainly didn't pay, I'm out of town, sorry. Okay, we certainly didn't pay enough attention to some of the things that we should have paid attention to. For instance, in 1974, 4,000 California nurses struck 40 major Bay Area hospitals and clinics, demanding, among other things, increased pay, better pensions, and a guarantee of every other weekend off. In addition, the New York Times reported many strikers agreed with Gail Dobson at Mount Sinai that the nurses' increasing feminist consciousness led them to seek more equal opportunity with the hospital's largely male administrative staff. Which, you know, kind of, that's one of the arguments we make here about the 70s, really. That, and in that same decade, we find the Times again telling us about, in 76, 2,500 Seattle nurses on strike, a strike that lasted 65 days. It was the longest ever at that point. Reflecting, according to the New York Times, the new militancy of registered nurses here and elsewhere. The issues were wages, staffing, and the agency shop, but there was also an emotional issue. Times tells us. According to one doctor, it used to be nurses could be yelled at and their opinions ignored. Now they will challenge doctors and sometimes even substitute their judgment for his. This is an issue of parity brought by the smart young nurses who have recently, this is the Times now, I'm not me, the smart young nurses who have recently graduated and sparked by the women's movement that is making it so hard to end this strike.
All right, thank you, Cal, for kicking us off. Next, we're going to hear from Sandra Lane, who works with healthcare workers in Pennsylvania and New Jersey for the health professionals and allied employees. union. One of their bargaining units is workers at Red Cross, and if you've been reading labor notes or other union publications, you know that Red Cross workers around the country have, in the last year or two, tried to put together a strike coalition comprising 5 or 6 different unions, a daunting organizational challenge, and some of the Red Cross workers in different parts of the country have actually waged coordinated and separate strikes. So Sandra's going to be reporting on what HPA has been doing as part of this resurgence of healthcare union militancy.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Sandra. I work for HPAE. I feel like we should start off with a chant maybe, just to get us, bring the spirit of the strike here. So one of our big chants was Red Cross, and then you were called back with double cross, attacking Red Cross. So we'll do that maybe a couple times. So Red Cross, double cross. Red Cross, double cross. Red Cross, double cross. Nice. I feel like I'm back at the picket line. So I was fortunate to work on this strike with about 250 Red Cross workers in Philadelphia, along with actually Valerie and Adam who are in the room, hopefully jump in at some point. But so these are, just to give you a little bit of background, these are the people. How many people have given blood to Red Cross before? I did it in high school to like get out of class, right? So these are the people who drive to the blood drive. Sometimes they're like 2 or 3 hours away from their homes. They set up the blood drives, and then they draw your blood when you're there. And then if anything goes wrong, they're the first people to like respond, right? If there's like a bad stick or something like that. So we were in the situation where we were getting to the table to bargain another contract, and Red Cross basically had a national plan where they were going to waive our collective, try and waive the collective bargaining rights over healthcare with all of the unions that represented their workers. So, and in addition, they basically wanted to gut the contract. Or as our president, Renee Conyers, said, they just walked in with like the front page and the back page of the contract and was like, here you go, here's our proposals, right? So they wanted to eliminate like travel time, which is really big. If you can imagine, like half your job is like getting there and getting back. They wanted to eliminate the 8-hour day just across the board. So it became really clear to us early on that if we were going to fight against this, it was going to have to be a national fight, and it was going to have to be a public campaign, and we were probably going to have to actually remove our labor from the situation in order to really get them to back off on things. So I think one of the things that was really like at the center of this campaign was the strength of our membership, right? Or maybe at the center of most campaigns, but what we really tried to do during this, when you're asking people to go out on strike in this tough economy and just with all the circumstances, what we really tried to keep as central was just like the one-on-one conversations that we had with our bargaining unit members and that they had with each other, and always bring it back to like, you know, what are the main issues? And I think what always came out was like, yes, it's really tough to go on strike against, you know, these issues, but also this really strong, like, innate feeling that something is just wrong. Like Red Cross has just gone too far, and people just had enough and needed to walk out. So that was really like what carried us. And even though, you know, we were using texting and Facebook and all these like tools of quick communication, we really centered it on like individual conversations with people, house visits if we needed to, and just feeling like where are people at. So I think one of the main challenges we had during the public campaign was that Red Cross is just seen as this like big, benevolent, charitable image, right? That's like the association that most people have with Red Cross. Known for their disaster relief, both like in the US and abroad. And then we were working with a media that's constantly trying to frame striking workers as like greedy, and they just want more wages, and they want these benefits, and they should just be happy that they have a job, right? So we were working with this media that was really not in our favor, and then also against this like image where there's so much stigma against coming out against an organization like the Red Cross. So one of the things we were constantly trying to do is like flip that image and say like, no, it's not our workers that are greedy, it's the Red Cross that's greedy, and they can afford to do more, and it's the workers that are actually really benevolent and have this cause that's worth fighting for. So we found that that research played a really big role in this, and we found that while Red Cross has like a disaster relief section of it, it also has a biomedical section, and that's the one that actually sells the blood that you donate. How many people knew that they sell the blood that you donate? Okay, I certainly didn't know that, right? Like, you think that when you're donating blood, it's going to a disaster going on or something like that, but they actually make $2 billion off the sale of your donated blood, which is pretty incredible. So what we wanted to do was just draw attention to that. And then on top of that, we found that they were constantly facing safety violations. So they've been fined $37 million from the FDA for things like having to recall blood, unsafe packaging, and things like that. So basically, the FDA is telling them what our workers have been telling them the whole time, which is like, this is unsafe. Like, we can't do our jobs with this little staffing. We can't do our jobs when we're, working 6 hours with no breaks, right? So, so one of the main things was really turning the bargaining issues into public safety issues. So, like, how does that impact the donor? How does that impact the blood supply if someone has to like work at a late drive, get home at 3 in the morning, and these are all like real scenarios, like things that I hear from our members. They get home at 3 in the morning and then they have to be up at 5:30 to get to another drive, which is like all the way, 2 hours away, and then work 4 hours without a break. Like, do you want that person sticking a needle in you? Probably not. So we really tried to focus it on blood safety. And then once we kind of had that like blood safety image, then we just threw punches at Red Cross and tried to hit them with everything we had. We picketed 7 sites over 3 weeks, and we also tried to spring up at the mobile drives. We got a resolution passed at City Council. We had politicians come out to the picket line. We held a rally in Washington, D.C., where we had Randy Weingarten speak. We had Jesse Jackson come out to the picket line and go on Fox News to talk about the campaign. We really focused on our connections with like schools and churches, because those are the largest donor base for Red Cross. So getting together with like school groups and PTA and really saying like, how is this a safety issue? And then getting like faith leaders involved in this as well. I think it was ultimately like all of that public pressure. We put up billboards around Philadelphia that said Red Cross, double cross. And then finally, we had politicians just asking the Red Cross, like, hey, like, it's time to get back to the table. So after 3 weeks, we actually got back, we got a cooling off period. We were able to go back under the existing contract for 3 weeks. And one of the stipulations, the first thing the Red Cross said when we sat down to negotiate that was like, okay, but you got to take the billboards down, which was like so great. It's like those are the moments we live for, because you know that it was like totally impacting them. Even though the entire time they're saying like, oh, the blood supply is fine, we're okay, we can do all these drives with like 7 managers, it's all right, and then it, when it comes out, we really impacted them. So we were able to keep the public campaign going for 3 weeks and negotiate a contract where we got protective language over the healthcare. We got them to fight back on synchronicity. But we were able to like push back on almost all of the takebacks. We got a signing bonus and some other things for our members that were really beneficial. And we're still fighting the healthcare piece. So we got this strong language in our contract where we didn't have to accept the waiver, but now they're trying to back down on a lot of it. So I think that's still a constant fight that we're doing, but I think a big part of the strike was just shifting the balance of power, because we had so many workers who were just feeling really disempowered. Their lives were already really difficult to schedule, to live, to work at the job, and going out on strike and being out on that picket line, it was difficult. It was like one of the hottest Philly summers. It was like 98 degrees. We tried to make it fun. We brought like squirt guns and squirted each other, tried to like pour ice water on each other. Like, we tried to like make it worth coming out for when we knew that people were hurting. But just to like see people on the line, to get them like on the megaphones shouting at their managers when they were like driving into work. Like, I think just the fabric of that daily life of the being on the picket line is really where the shift of power happened, and I think where people felt really strong together and like something was shifted. So I feel really fortunate to have worked on that, and I hope that like Adam and Valerie add more after this. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Sandra. Our next speaker is John Borsos. Some of you may have met him yesterday at the fundraiser that Sister Ellen David Friedman organized for NUHW. John, like Cal, has a background in labor history, has a PhD in that subject. Left the academic track a number of years ago for the benefit of the labor movement. First worked for the service employees in Ohio and West Virginia. Then moved west, was a longtime leader of the pre-trusteeship United Healthcare Workers West, founding member of the new National Union of Healthcare Workers, and is going to be talking to us a little bit today about two of the three largest strikes in the last 8 months, both of which, by no coincidence, took place at Kaiser-Permante in California as the product of a strike coalition involving the NUHW, the California nurses, and most recently the operating engineers. Brother John.
Thanks. I thought it might be a little bit helpful to step back a little bit and talk about the context for the strikes. And Cal mentioned it briefly in his opening remarks. But what's been going on, at least in the West Coast, with regard to healthcare workers' militancy or strike activity, it's not something really new. Really, since the late 80s and 90s and going into the early part of this century, there's been a whole tradition of and really a culture that was created of healthcare workers striking and taking a lot of action to try to move contracts forward, contract standards forward. In fact, I would say the significant thing about what was going on the West Coast really until about 2008 or 2009, from a period of the late or mid-90s to that period, almost all the strikes were very offensive. In fact, most employers did not come to the bargaining table with takeaways. It was us trying to make advances in contract standards. We had begun to line up our contracts in such a way to get as many contracts to expire at one time, to create just a movement of healthcare workers who were fighting for the same kind of standards, who would then be able to win a breakthrough with one employer and then hold other employers to the same standard. And over a period of about 15 years, the first time we really did it in a coordinated way was in 1996, where we had about 12 or 15 hospitals that were coordinated, which we thought was a big deal at the time. By the time we got to 2008, we were up to almost every one of our major employers, and we began to add nursing home workers into the mix. So by 2008, we were talking about, I think it was 70,000 workers who were at the bargaining table kind of all at the same time. And our method was to take one employer and win a contract breakthrough, and then hold other employers to the same standard, and if the other employers didn't reach that standard, then they would be struck. The culmination of that was a 60-day strike at a Sutter hospital called California Pacific Medical Center in 2005, where we represented 18% of the workforce and won a 60-day strike. And the primary issue in the strike was a voice in how the hospital got staffed and organizing rights. So there was this whole movement that was created, where healthcare workers didn't want to be the hospital that settled short of the goals. We would spend really years preparing people for the contract demands, and then you wanted to be the hospital or the part of the system that made the breakthrough, and then once one made it, then everybody kind of held each other to the same standard. That actually shifted pretty significantly with the trusteeship that people have talked about when SEIU took over the union. In the first contract settlement they reached post-trusteeship, SEIU gave away a 40-year standard of fully employer-paid health insurance for healthcare workers in at least the Bay Area. First contract they settled gave that away. Since then, they've negotiated contracts that have given away, in fact, in the middle of a contract, defined benefit pension plans. They've given away subcontracting. They've given away job security. A number of our contracts did not have management rights clauses in them. They've allowed the employer to incorporate management rights clauses into them. The contract expirations took us 20 to 25 years to get lined up. Now all the contracts are off cycle. The standards in the nursing home industry continue to deteriorate. So the strikes that are happening now with us that Steve and Cal talked about is, as we have won representation rights at a number of these hospitals that were previous SEIU facilities, we're in bargaining, and they're now defensive fights. I mean, there was a context of what's going on in the economy that healthcare employers were taking advantage of what was going on anyways to say we need concessions, but most of the healthcare employers, at least in California, are doing extremely well financially. Kaiser-Permante, for example, has made $6 billion over the last 3 years. It's their record profit time period. Catholic Healthcare West has made, extreme profits. That they're taking advantage of what's going on in the public sector and elsewhere, and they're also seeing the massive concessions that SEIU has been given, in particular, not just SEIU, but primarily SEIU. I mean, we've totaled it up. In the last 3 years, SEIU has given back at least $3 billion in concessions, and close to $1 billion of that is in healthcare in California alone. So the employers feel empowered to come to the bargaining table and ask for concessions. We've had these strikes that Steve talked about at Kaiser. We've struck now 4 times. The last 2 strikes has been with the contracts give the other unions the right to sympathy strike, and the CNA pulled out 17,000 people both times, and stationary engineers have struck the second time with us, and primarily because they see that what Kaiser is proposing, which are these massive takeaways. This is, again, this company that's made $6 billion is proposing to eliminate defined benefit pension plan, cut people's retiree health insurance, change people's health insurance premium takeaway, co-payments and things like that. That this is like the last stand for us to try to stop Kaiser from doing that. To complicate the situation, I guess, further is that SEIU still represents 43,000 people at Kaiser, and while these strikes are going on and the SEIU contract allows people to sympathy strike, SEIU is in the facilities urging their people to scab. And on top of that, while SEIU is now acknowledging that they'll be facing the same takeaways at the bargaining table, they're denigrating the utility of striking as a mechanism to actually get the employer to make concessions, the employer to make concessions. So while we're striking, SEIU is promoting a new method of getting employers to reach contract settlements, which they call the wellness walk. So if folks haven't heard about this, SEIU's agreed to a number of wellness programs in their contracts, which are if you as an individual don't take certain measures to demonstrate that you're trying to get yourself healthy, then the employer will either assign a penalty where you start to pay more for your health insurance. That's typically the way that it goes. The kinds of things that you have to do are health assessment surveys to then get into smoking cessation programs. And the most extreme thing that SEIU's agreed to is at a Sutter Hospital in Oakland and Berkeley, that you get your body mass index measured, and if your body mass index doesn't begin to shrink at the appropriate rate, then you're expected to pay for higher health insurance premium co-payments. They've now gone into bargaining with Catholic Healthcare West and Kaiser, and they're promoting their campaign as a Get Healthy campaign. And they're agreeing on the front end of the need to have wellness programs in these facilities. For Kaiser, they've said that it's easier for Kaiser to market Kaiser as a service provider if they can demonstrate that their own employees are enrolled in these wellness programs, because then people will want to be part of Kaiser, because they'll ask Kaiser, well, are your employees in a wellness program? So SEIU can demonstrate to help their employer the utility of being in a wellness program. So the way that SEIU is and now part of the AFL-CIO coalition of unions that's in negotiations with Kaiser, in contrast to these massive strikes, is saying the way that we're going to force Kaiser to walk the walk is we're going to show how healthy we can be. And so on March the 1st, they staged a series of events around the Kaiser facilities where people came out on their lunch hour and walked around the hospital, not with picket signs, because picket signs and bullhorns are a sign of the past, but to demonstrate how healthy people are going to be. And they're now going to do wellness walks to demonstrate to Kaiser that they are totally committed to helping people get healthier. And if we can get healthier, then Kaiser can be healthy, and somehow people are going to win contract settlements by virtue of that. So, call us old-fashioned, in fact. Stern action.
Not to mention unhealthy.
proud to have to say that one of the disparaging remarks among many that Stern has labeled us is that we're throwbacks to the 1930s because we believe in strikes and militancy. Okay, we plead guilty. But we really think that the most effective way to go forward is to organize people to stand up to their employers and to have demands that healthcare workers deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. And sometimes if that doesn't work out at the bargaining table, you have to be prepared to strike. So, if you want to read about this, I wanted to say, Cal Winslow, along with Steve, has a great book that spells all this out, labeled Labor Civil War in California, which is available in the PM Press down in the display area.
All right, I bet nobody expected to come and learn about a new mobilization tactic, the wellness walk. Our next
speaker. Early and go walk.
Yeah, no more elevators in this building. We want to see everybody up there, up and down on the stairs. Our next speaker is Judy Sheridan-Gonzalez, who many of you know. Judy is a longtime working nurse in New York City, well-known labor and community activist, a bulwark of the Solidarity Committee for Brother Rafi's Union in Puerto Rico, the Puerto Rican teachers, the FMPR. And most recently, as you know, Judy has been a leader in the Reform Caucus in the New York State Nurses Association, which is why we now have a new title attached to her name, Vice President, and along with some folks in this room and allies around the country and the rank and file of her union are helping through the union democracy and reform process to revitalize this very key part of healthcare unionism in New York State. So, Sister Judy, congratulations.
Thank you. So I went to the New Left Forum 101 yesterday, and I learned some tricks. To have people go out on strike, the worst thing to do is have people going out on strike without any preparation and any ability to win anything and just make them really hate the union because they're going to lose everything. So going out on strike is not the only thing. It has to be in a context where you can win something. Maybe not win the benefits that you wanted economically, but win something. Most likely what you really want to win is having the people that you're representing understand their power and the power of withholding their labor and what that does to their employer, who they basically all hate. I think that's one thing that we all share. So we entered, as you heard, we had a very volatile situation because we didn't control our union. And our union, NUHW, was, incompetent, corrupt, entrenched, and this pen doesn't work. Incompetent, corrupt, and this is even worse. Okay, I'm gonna be able to do my, the blue one works. So anyway, we have our union leadership. This is in early 2011. We have our union leadership, which is, incompetent, corrupt, entrenched, and basically out to sabotage us because we had a slate. I don't like the word reform slate. I like kind of radical slate, revolutionary. The reform, insurrectional. We kind of this renegade group. We called ourselves the S3, and we had these really cute buttons. I forgot to bring a little picture of Superman symbol with the 3, staffing, security, and strength. We had sold them for $5, raised $8,000 for our campaign from nurses selling these little buttons all across the state. But we had been robbed of our access to one another. The nurses in the various units. We have 37,000 members, 37,727, something like that. But 37,000 of them basically are in the union. And I'm not even going to go into the incredible structural issues that we have in our union. So 28,000 had expired contracts, long expired. In 2011, most of them expired in 2010, even before. No contract, no plan. We also had a pension fund that the union trustees had unfortunately agreed to create a 2-tier system for the first time in our history that was hanging over everyone's head. Most of us had the first tier, but they was like, well, if you don't give us everything back, you're getting that second inferior tier. We also had a benefits plan that for the first time went to arbitration. It was an ERISA plan, went to arbitration And $4,000, $5,000 in out-of-pockets were now facing people who never had to pay out-of-pocket. So you had, that happened. We also had a staffing crisis. And, I mean, we had issues, okay? The nurses were upset. There were issues. There was a staffing crisis. There was bullying in the workplace. All the things that happen to humiliate people that make them hate their boss. So we had a lot of boss haters. But the other problem that we had
You learned that just yesterday?
Yeah. We had a lot of union haters among our members. They hated the union. Very hard to do anything when you hate the union. Meanwhile, in New York City, we had this very powerful and very rich League of Voluntary Hospitals that kind of stepped all over the nurses. But they had a lot of money. We had all the elements to really pull something off. So what we did is our little renegade group, before we got control of the union, which we did win an election in September, but they didn't seat us. That's another story. We were in court. We won all our cases. We eventually got seated on Halloween and during the snowstorm. But so what happened? How do we transform, this into people willing to go out on strike? So we identified 4 key places, what we call the Big Four. Major medical centers in New York City, the major empires that had about 10,000 nurses. 4 places with 10,000 nurses. We met in secret until we won the election, until we were seated, rather. We met in secret and we tried to develop a plan to have a collective strike. We looked at our colleagues in other places, notably California and NU, who had done these really interesting kind of, remember, we have different bargaining units, so we weren't doing group bargaining. We had all these different bargaining units that were bargaining separately. We wanted to have a joint plan to go out on strike together. We had seen that happen in NNU, in California, in Minnesota, and elsewhere. So what did the corrupt, horrible, entrenched union leadership do? They created a hate campaign against California. Anything to do with NNU. Don't look there. Those people are evil. They're the demons. And, we're linked to them. So we're meeting in secret. We put together this thing. We know we have the issues. We're trying to figure out how we're going to go out on strike without having any union resources or any support, and in fact sabotage. But we started to develop our base. We started to develop the issues. We started to do campaigns. We won the election. We kind of almost linked the election campaign to the contracts and to taking over our union. So it was kind of convenient because we were able to raise consciousness in that level to transform the nurses into a militant group of people. So what did the union leadership do? They launched these hate campaigns. I mean, this was amazing. I don't think you ever. So they mailed, and I was seen as a targeted person. So they did 4 mailings to my members, which consisted of, a wanted poster.
You look nice there.
That was this, you can't, why is Judy putting her, a strike may help Judy, but it can hurt you. They mailed, okay, our opposition in NISNA, in coalition with the ANA, the national organization that was terrified they were going to lose their $5 million a year that they were stealing from us. So they do all these mailings. This one is the best one. It has a whole thing about our whole slate, and it says, "Don't be fooled. Transparency is another word for communism."
All right.
Because we build ourselves as transparent.
Communism looks better and better.
As communists, but they made that connection. So, we had this ambiance during this volatile period where people were starting to take strike votes, where our enemies in the organization, our entrenched people, and the ANA, this organization we were paying all this money to, and the employer were all attacking us. So it just basically worked in our favor. The members got really pissed off. The employers started calling people at home and harassing them, getting their cell phones. They were furious. So we were actually able to generate a series of strike votes that took place. None of us ever actually went out on strike. But we all took strike votes, and we all had a targeted date that we're all going to go out together. So the hospitals started to get really scared, and which was really exciting for the nurses, and the nurses became more and more militant. Once we were seated, we had 6 weeks to pull all of this off. In 6 weeks, thanks to Gabe and a couple of other people, we got some of the talent from NUHW, helped to pull together a series of strike votes, and we knew we had union support. We were able to get the front page of the New York Times, which they used for one of the pictures. We had posters, we did other stuff, and we did preparatory work, because remember, people are not used, this group of people weren't really used to going out on strike. They all wanted to, but no one sort of knew how to confront the boss. So we did a lot of activities that led up to it. You really have to do that so people kind of get a sense of their power. My favorite one was they had, at my house, we had a big event, a gala at the Waldorf Astoria, a black tie affair. You know, I didn't know a black tie affair, they actually have to wear black ties. I found that out. So a few of us went all around Waldorf Astoria, and what we had were, instead of leaflets, we had these little gift cards. They looked like gift cards. And there were 1,000 people that went to the event. We had a bunch of nurses outside. And as the people were entering in their black ties and their black dresses, these nurses were handing them these little pretty gift cards that said, we thank you so much for your donations to the medical center. Please designate that you'd like it to go to nurse staffing because we're very understaffed. So the hospital found out, they came very upset, and they tried to get rid of us, but we made friends with the security guards who were also in a union. I think they were in 32 Beach, I don't know what union they were. But they were like helping us. Every time we got moved from one area, we went to another area, and then one of them showed us the gift bags that all the people were going to get, so we slipped them on. Then one of the other security guards who was management saw us, and he kept taking them out, and then they moved the thing, we kept putting them back in. So, the nurses were doing something kind of, not illegal, but fun, because you have to have fun too. So that was one of our events. And then as the people were coming in and said, "Hi, I'm a nurse at Montefiore, welcome, we'd really like you to support us." Well, "Oh, thank you." We said, "It's on the 3rd floor, you look lovely, by the way." So and what we heard upstairs was they said, "Oh, the nurses were welcoming," well, that's how we got busted. The nurses were welcoming us in and giving us these cards, it was so nice. So that was when they found us out. But what we did there, and we talked about it, I have 1 minute left, right? Okay. So what they did there, and they talked about it, was what we were able to do is get the nurses to see that they really did have a lot of power. So we all had 11th hour agreements after the strike votes. What happened was, when the hospital wanted all these concessions, paying for benefits, 2-tier system, no staffing, we were able to push that envelope dramatically from the time we took the strike votes, and a few of us filed notices. Once they filed the notices, the repression of the employer mobilized the nurses. We won. There were some people who were giving something back, but nothing like what they wanted. And we put in the context. We didn't win everything because we actually didn't go out on strike, because once the employer pushed that envelope close enough to people not being sure to go out, we had to make that decision not to go out, because we weren't going to win a whole lot more by going out, and people started caving in with the repression. But the point is the nurses for the first time felt that they had brought the League of Voluntary Hospitals to its knees, and we said we didn't knock them down, but we did bring them to their knees. And it was very exciting for them, and we also promised that the next contract we're going to be much more organized, because what you can do in 6 weeks after expiration is very different than what you can do in 3 years. So we have an empowered group of nurses who are looking forward to the future, and we hope we can grow in that way.
So Judy, you learned all this in a cartooning workshop yesterday? I missed that one in the catalog. All right, our final speaker before we throw things open to what I know is going to be a very lively discussion is Brother Bill Cruice, who is the Executive Director of PASNAP, Pennsylvania, who represents staff nurses and allied professionals. PASNAP had a very big strike, I believe, 2 years ago at Temple. One of the strike leaders or activists, an RN named Marty Harrison, came out. Labor Notes was one of the most popular speakers that year. I think the strike was still going on. So Bill's going to talk about that and some other experiences that his union has had recently, jousting with healthcare employers in Pennsylvania.
I actually wrote some prepared remarks, because if I didn't do that, I knew if I didn't do that, there was no way I would be able to get in 10 minutes, right? Because the issue of strikes and workers being on strike and what it takes to be successful at being on strike is something that I've been it's very important to me, and I've led probably 10 very large strikes in my work as an organizer and leader of a couple of different unions, including the one that Sandra works with now, and one that John Borsos used to work for in Pennsylvania, California, a couple of other places. It's something I think is very, very important. And the theoretician Clausewitz once said that war is diplomacy by other means. And if you think about that, anybody who's ever been on strike, or particularly who's led a strike, knows exactly how apt that metaphor is. When you're on strike, it really is, in many ways, you're at war. But, you know, as Cal suggested, you look over the last couple of years, and the number of strikes that are happening in this country are near the historic lows, if not historic lows, and there really is a direct parallel line that you can draw from collective action by workers and standard of living and quality of life, not just for the working families, but also for the entire society as a whole. But the problem, of course, is that when thinking about going on strike, we have this absolutely inequitable legal framework to go on strike, and we can't not understand how deep that is and how important that is. The prohibition on secondary boycotts. We forget how profound a loss that is to have as working people. The decision of McKay Radio that allows for the permanent replacement of strikers when they go on strike for economic reasons. This is really something that we have to understand, know how to get around these things. The reason is because the strike is such a fundamental arrow in our quiver. We have to figure out how to use the strike effectively, to think creatively about it all the time. And most importantly, we have to dig deep in our internal organization, and we have a motto in our union, and that is that in PASNAP, preparation is the most important thing in our union, and we take preparation for strikes very, very seriously. And when you think about it, if Clausewitz is right that war is just diplomacy by other means, all unions have to take a look at their diplomacy in the 3 years or 2 years or 4 years leading up to when the actual strike happens. So on March 31st, Steve has mentioned already, 1,500 members of our union, 1,000 registered nurses, and 500 other professionals, categories like respiratory therapists and x-ray tech and lab tech, dietitians, etc., went on strike against Temple University Health System really in the teeth of the worst recession that the country's seen in about 70 years. There were certainly some economic issues that drove the strike, but the fundamental issue that caused the strike was Temple's attack and their attempt to really weaken the union for a generation or more. And to do that, they made part of what they called their last best final offer, where there was two really very serious issues pointed right at the heart of the union. One was a clause that said, they called it a non-disparagement clause, which basically means any worker who said anything negative in any way in the public, in any forum whatsoever, was subject to discipline up to and including termination. Okay, we call it a gag clause. The other one was, and anybody and all of you in this room who understand labor will understand how important this next issue is, they wanted to eliminate the union shop. So essentially you have an attempt to defang the union, really probably for 20 or 25 years. Of course, we had our issues and some economic issues, but on the question of the gag clause, there was a famous comment by the chief negotiator for the hospital who said, "Look, if you want your constitutional rights, you have to go elsewhere to work." Right? They were very clear on what they were talking about. But the strike, although it was in 2010, the origin of the strike was really in 1999. And just very quick history, it's very important to understand, and our sisters in New York are going through a very similar thing. In 1999, the nurses at Temple belonged to the local chapter of the National Education Association, PSEA, the Pennsylvania State Education Association, and in 1999, because there was no preparation in leading up to that negotiation in 1999, Temple imposed significant concessions on the union, and I won't go into details, just take it at my word that they were significant at a time when the labor market situation absolutely should not have produced those kinds of concessions in 1999. There was a nursing shortage, and the fury that ensued from both the embarrassment and the fury of losing at a time of a great nursing shortage and being almost humiliated at the bargaining table was really the final straw that drove the nurses in PSEA healthcare to leave with the help of our sisters in California, and specifically Jill Ferrillo here, who's in the audience here today, the nurses in Pennsylvania were able to liberate themselves from PSEA and to create and form an independent union, of which, of course, Temple and the 1,000 nurses at Temple is really the anchor and one of the most important parts of it. But we knew that coming out of, and PSEA had already agreed to a 4-year contract. So we had 4 years that we had till 2003. But we went about, we knew that we were going to have to change the relationship. And for the next period of time, we worked very, very hard to just completely change the mentality of the nurses about what the union is. There was a lot of union hate, right? No question about it, because PSEA had reified and reproduced the idea of the union as a third party constantly. In fact, the way that they got people to join the union was to say, if you join the union, you get discounts in auto insurance. So we had a lot of work to do, and thankfully, I was recruited to be the executive director, was pulled away from HPAE in New Jersey where I was working, and we had an awful lot of work to do, not only at Temple, but all over the state. Let me just skip ahead a little bit, because I know that there's going to be some time issues here, but suffice it to say, in 2003, we completely, because of the internal organization, because of our preparation from day one, we had a date on the calendar of September 30th, 2003, where we were going to reverse every one of these concessions, and we rebuilt the union from the ground up, one-on-one organizing, and we reversed every single concession in 2003. By 2006, in the next cycle, the 500 professional technical staff looking around and say, we have to join this union, they decided that they had to join our union, so they did. They were part of another union that had become very moribund and very, just really not doing very well, and they joined our union. And so you can imagine in 2006, we were, with that added strength that we had, we also did some very good things in 2006. And we knew, at the end of the negotiations in 2006, that we were going to be on strike in 2009. And we knew that because when we finished the negotiations, usually, no matter how rancorous and how conflictive the negotiations are, people usually shake hands at the end, right? Is that in your experience, John, even? Usually. This time, the representatives of Temple, after we concluded and signed all the tentative agreements, got up and walked out, never even shook our hands. So I knew at that point that the humiliation kind of like was flipped, right? And they knew that they were going to come after us in 2009. So you fast forward to 2009. We knew that the war was coming, and the reason is that the hospital went out and recruited a new CEO whose only job was really to attack the union, a guy named Ed Nodebart. And if you imagine a cross between Dick Cheney and Voldemort, that's who we got. And his job was very clear. He had been kicked out of the University of Maryland Medical Center, and that's the short straw that we drew. So with this backdrop, we started a strike on March 31st, 2010. We had 95% of the members voting to authorize the strike, and we do strikes very systematically. I do strikes very systematically, and we do it a certain way. We pick it by department, and the reason we do that is that we work areas are how people hold each other accountable. So we don't want people, we want people to know that when they come to the picket line, that they're there and their work area leader is there, and it's much, much easier to keep track of when you have to go on the picket line. Lawn chairs are forbidden. And that should be a rule that anybody ever has a strike has. That's been my pet peeve since I first ran a strike in 1989. We don't fall into the injunction trap. Too many unions fall into the injunction trap. First day of the strike, everybody gets their yayas out and they block the driveway, right? And all of a sudden, the next day, you're stuck with an injunction limiting your pickets, right? Big mistake. Because the picket line is the lifeblood, the hearts and lungs of any strike, right? You've got to have a vibrant, large picket line, and you can't do that if you allow an undisciplined membership to get an injunction on the first day of the strike. Big mistakes. We never do it, and we teach people all through the process about how important this is. The workers run the picket line. We teach them how to do it. They run it. We have rallies 2 or 3 times a week, right? Very important. Obviously, a lot of the things that Sandra talked about, we also did and do, and will always do, bringing in politicians. You don't let politicians have any wiggle room, especially these so-called friends of ours in the Democratic Party. When you're on strike, there is no middle ground, right? You're on that picket line, or we'll remember forever, right? Temple, of course, brought in 1,000 scabs from a company called Health Source Global Staffing to try to run the operation while we were on strike, and they later had to come clean in their financial statements in a conference call with their bondholders that they spent $30 million on the strike in 30 days, $1 million a day, when it would have cost them $8 million to meet every single one of our economic demands. And that, of course, we didn't know we wouldn't ever think we're getting every single one, but if we got every single one, it would only be $8 million. So clearly it wasn't about money, right? It was about the union. After 30 days, let me just wrap up here. After 30 days, there was a settlement. I actually have, I don't know if we have time, I have like a 6 or 7 minute quick video I could show you where we got a settlement, and the workers didn't want to leave the picket line, even though we had a settlement at 9:30 in the morning, right? And it's really kind of ironic. At the beginning of the strike, it was very warm. At the beginning of April, by the end of April, it was really cold, right? And we got a settlement sometime 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning, and the couple units that were on the picket line, we had a ratification meeting later that afternoon, evening. Oftentimes in strikes, once you get a settlement, people start drifting away. They said, absolutely not. We're staying here until we get to the meeting at 7 o'clock tonight, because we don't know. People could vote no, and we need to keep the picket line going, right? It was a great strike. After 30 days, we had a grand total of 43 of our members out of 1,500 cross the picket line, wow, which is a 97% participation rate in the strike, and they picketed, right? My point is this. That 97% participation did not come about in March of 2010. That came about in 2006, 2007, 2008, and 2009 in building a union that sees the union, that characterizes the union as 2 parties. There is no 3 parties. There is the workers, there's the boss, and when the workers come together, they are the union, and there are still 2 parties. It is the union and the boss. And you have to imbue everything that you do as a union to reproduce this idea. And if you do that, the strike becomes something that can be used. One other quick postscript, just about the legal framework and why you must always think creatively and boldly about the law and make sure you have unfair labor practices lined up so that you take away the issue of permanent replacements. And in Pennsylvania, we also have this unique thing where a strike can be declared a lockout, right? If the employer is the first one to alter the status quo. So myself and my outside counsel, John Walters, who's sitting here today, came up with what it turned out to be a fairly ingenious legal theory about them not sort of implementing a lawful order of the Pennsylvania Labor Relations Board. We took that, we had everybody apply for unemployment, and it turned out, we found out after the strike was over that we won that case, and not only our members were on strike for 30 days, and not only did Temple spend $1 million a day, they ended up having to write checks to the workers for $2,500 apiece. So the strike was declared a lockout after the strike was over, and Temple, their defeat was consolidated that much further, and after the strike, of course, Nodebart, you've seen this picture before, 9 months later, he's gone, right? Their whole labor relations department is gone because of Temple. Finally, somebody smart in that administration realized that it was a really, really bad move to take on these workers, this union, in the way that they did. And the union is vibrant and strong to this day, and we have actually a fairly better relationship with the new Temple as we speak. Thanks.
Okay, that was a high-quality series of presentations. I thank everybody. We have a wealth of activist experience in this room from all kinds of unions, the CNA, 1199, the unions represented here, the mass nurses. I'm going to keep a list as people put up their hand. I'm going to alternate calling on men and women. If you could ID yourself and your organization, if any, that would help. And keep your comments short, then everybody will get a chance to speak. We can't really have 5 answers to every question or comment, so I'm going to err on the side of people in the audience speaking as opposed to hearing more from the panel, as much as we'd like to hear more from the panel. So, ground rules sound acceptable? Good. All right, brother in the back.
I'm Sheridan-Gonzalez. I'm a retired teacher with the UFT New York, and a member of the state organization is NICER, and the national is AFT, which is part of the AFL-CIO. In New York State, we don't have the right to strike because of the tail law, but our UFT as well as the AFT on the national level is very good at concessions, winning concessions, supporting neoliberal agenda, promoting charter schools, having Bill Gates as the speaker at their conventions, national conventions, over 2 years ago in Seattle. But just wondering well, we have a union that's pretty much deactivated at the local base, at each school, not even what we call the local chapters. So if it's been addressed already, because I know Ms. Sheridan has public unions that, members that are in public hospitals that can't strike by law. Okay, so in terms of how to activate it, because we're trying to look for ways to transform this union that's pretty much, in corporate hands. So how do we do that within the UFT here in New York City? We have lots of groups that have sprung out and trying to create a new union, caucus that will eventually, be empowered. So just what recommendations people have in terms of, consolidating the rank and file into a group that can win at some point.
Good question. Let's hope Randy doesn't hear about wellness walks. Any advice for?
I need the wellness one.
Any advice for the rebel caucus and the teachers? Any other teachers in the room? Well, Brother Tim, I want to hear from a woman first, and then we'll come back to Tim. It was a wealth of advice on reform movements in New York City unions. Do I see a female hand before we hear from Brother Tim? Yes.
I had a quick question, but if you would like to answer, since
that
was on point.
Follow the rules, and then.
Okay. My name is Allie. I'm here with International Marxist Tendency, and I have a background in labor, education and labor. My question was, given that there is a lack of anti-scab laws, how do you get to your members and convince them to strike when there's a very real possibility that their job could not be there when they get back? How do you reach out to them and convince them that it's worth doing that?
Are you taking a few questions at a time and then we're answering how you're doing it?
Why don't we have an answer, because I don't want to lose track of Angel's question about building reform movements too. So, but on this specific question, any?
Yeah, I think there's first of all, there's at least in our union, our experience, there's 2 things that you have to do. First of all, you must plan a legal strategy to make sure that you have credible unfair labor practices undergirding the collective action, and that requires somebody with some skill who understands the law, who understands bargaining, who understands impasse, and that's number 1. That's important. Number 2, what we do is we actually are very aggressive a year out in getting our members to find alternative sources of income during the strike, so that that they have some money coming in. But the fact is that you have to have a ULP strategy, and you have to think about it very much in advance.
Yeah, I agree with that. In healthcare, they're replaced. They even if it's a short-term strike or whatever the duration, it's not as if the hospital shuts down. And in fact, you have to tell people that on the front end. There's always a question about how we're going to cripple the hospital, and you tend not to cripple the hospital in the way by stopping the hospital from,
Yeah.
there's issues that come up about the replacement workers. That's always an issue. But part of it is the hospital. I mean, you have to give 10 days notice in healthcare, unlike any other industry, so the hospital can operate. I mean, it's built in. So a lot of the work ends up being on the picket line, but then figuring out other pressure points with the board of directors and that kind of stuff with the strikers and whatnot. So.
Okay, Tim, did you want to respond to Angel's question?
Yeah. Angel, the changing the UFT, the AFT, is a long-term project. I mean, to start with, retirees vote in that union, in New York City, AFT, and more retirees vote than current members. And there's a lot of old, backward people in Miami and Tel Aviv that vote in teacher elections. No, the New York Union has offices there in Miami and Tel Aviv, and we have to take this into context. In this country, the teaching profession was an instrument of backwardness and white supremacy. That, in fact, part of the attack on teachers in this country, it leads the attack on the public sector, but it's also an attack on the change in education and the role of teachers' unions in this country. That you have people of color that actually run districts of teachers' unions now. Those things are tremendous obstacles, and that the teachers' union has not made that transition from being one kind of union to another, to being what we would consider an actual labor organization, rather than part of the apparatus of white supremacy in this country. The last strike was 1968, the hate strike of '68. Now, I've never been in education or anything else, but I was one of those kids in the Ocean Hill-Brownsville Experimental School District. And I shouldn't have raised that because I can't fill it in. But you've, like always, like everywhere else, and more true than ever, you've got to start at the bottom with a committee and be ready for a long march. Not only is it a project on the ground in the teachers' union, you got to wait for a lot of old black backward people to die. It's a major transformation that is not going to happen soon. But I think you raise the right stuff. I think you look in the right arenas for people to work with. It's a long project.
Okay, sister here had her hand up.
Just to respond, I just want to also respond
Yeah.
to the question. I think there's two questions that Angel raises. One has to do with building rank and file power in an entrenched union, and the other is about the dilemma that the public sector people who don't have the right to strike face. Those are two separate issues. And I think what's really interesting about the tail law in New York City, or whatever laws exist elsewhere, is that public sector unions were given this gift. We'll give you, union shop, we'll give you a little office, we'll give you release time, we'll give you a pension, we'll give you benefits, and we're going to rob you of your right to fight us, basically. And that was the trade-off. And then what they did in the last 2 years, or actually longer than that, but particularly in the last 2 years, is say, well, we're going to keep, we're going to keep robbing you of your right to fight us, and now we're going to take everything else that we give you in exchange. So, too bad. And you don't have any way to fight that. And I think that, so the question of public workers really has to look at a comprehensive view about how to deal with that particular problem that they're facing right now. We do have public sector nurses. I was in a wildcat strike in the public sector, but the union didn't get punished as much as, it was a wildcat. So that's one thing to think about. But part two, in terms of building union power, I think, you're doing that. The thing of, there's no there's no little quick fix. I mean, it's rank and file power at the base, at the schools, at the hospitals, on the floors, getting those people energized around whatever their issues are, and it's really tedious. I've been doing this for 30 years, and we just finally got an electoral victory, and hopefully a real substantial victory. But it's what we have to do. It's years and years and making those alliances until, you know, that kind of ground up stuff comes up.
California public workers have a right to strike.
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to your question about scabs. One of the things that's been really effective with dealing with scabs, with strikes in healthcare, has been solidarity. And I think that that's probably the most important piece of dealing with strikes and dealing with power and dealing with scabs, because the more people that you can have supporting a strike, the harder it is for them to get the scabs, especially in healthcare where you've got a lot of particular professional positions that require licensure, et cetera, for them to be able to replace. It's harder than just, let's say folks who don't have that type of credentialing. So if you have solidarity between, first of all, let's say ancillary workers and registered nurses and other professionals inside a hospital, you have more power. And then if you have more than just one hospital striking of all of those people, then you have even a lot more power. And then if you're striking and it's not just one city and it's not just one state, but in fact you are looking at solidarity around the country and you have all of these people going out at the same time, that's even more power. And it becomes harder for these scab agencies to replace the workers. And so in coordinating strikes, and I have always argued for this, and I would argue for that today with this group, what we try to do in the NNU is to go out and seek out other people who are having problems around the country. Anybody have trouble out there? Okay, how's it going? What's going on with your bargaining? Sounds like it's bad. Oh, not surprised given the aggressiveness of the employers and the neoliberal agenda. So what we do is we find out who's in bargaining, and then we try to look for a holiday period that, it could be the 4th of July. It could be Christmas. It could be whatever holiday is coming up. I don't know. There's lots of them. And we try to coordinate our activity around strikes that would be in conjunction with that holiday, because what we found is that if you strike closer to a holiday, first of all, the workers are more kind of interested in striking, because there are a lot of, especially nurses, who have been trying to get time off with their families. They can't. You can't get holidays off. That's true in healthcare because it's 24/7, situation. And then the other thing is that it's harder for them to find scabs, because the scabs also want to be off on the holidays. Even the scabs from Louisiana and Mississippi, and we know them well. We see them at every strike. So they actually want to be off on the holiday too. They've got their kids they have to take care of. And so what happens is it drives the cost of the scabs a lot higher, so that the employer has to factor in the fact that they're going to have to pay double the amount for those scabs. But it's still going to be harder to get those scabs. And we found in some strike situations that, in fact, they couldn't even get the scabs. And so, thus, there were settlements. And oftentimes, there have been good settlements that have come as a result of coordinating these national strikes. We had a couple of them in NNU. Bill was involved in one where we had the Washington Hospital Center. We had this hospital up in Maine, some hospitals up in Michigan. Coordinated the strike. Took maybe one-day strikes. We had one-day strike, and then going into the second round of strikes into a holiday, coordinating nationally, solidarity. Got some great settlements out there with no concessions, and because they couldn't get the scabs. And the nurses and the other workers feel a little more confident when they see that it's harder for them to get the scabs. Maybe they won't replace us. So that's a long answer to your question.
Actually, the Wednesday before Thanksgiving is, in my experience, now is the best day.
It's the best.
It's the best.
They people want Black Friday
We
off.
always put it on our calendar as strike day.
Right.
Okay, so
Well, the one thing that Joe raises that's also why we wanted to have contracts lined up to be able to do the coordination that I'm surprised hasn't come up yet, is the the value in healthcare of, in some cases, a short-term strike versus a long-term strike with regard to replacement of the scabs is it's typically much more costly for them to replace people on a short-term strike, and there's an economy of scale that an employer achieves by a longer-term strike. And there's, going back to the issue Bill raised a few minutes ago too about the board, there's also really bad board law about how you can do short-term strikes, and there's a limit to the number that you can do. There has to be unique issues to it, but the strategy around strikes are not just open-ended strikes, but how long are you going to do it, and at what the timing.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually wanted to somewhat respond to the issue of like how you actually, because I don't think this gets enough credit, this gets enough mention, but how you actually reform a union within. And one of the things that I think is that Judy neglects to mention is that the fundamental thing about organizing is that, quite honestly, the people who work in a hospital or whatever workplace you're in aren't politically where we are. And the thing that Judy was able to do and spent 30 years doing in order to be successful is actually building relationships in the hospital and actually solving issues. And if you walk into Montefiore Medical Center, I mean, I don't want to embarrass you, but you say, somebody says, well, did you hear about what's going on with your grievance? You're like, oh yeah, Judy, came by and explained to us everything about the contract and did the day-to-day really difficult work of representational work that I think establishes the relationships to be able to do that. And that it's not something about just saying we want to go on strike. It's like they put in years and years and years of preparation in order to do that. And when you talk about your diagram, the one thing you don't mention when you said about the 10,000 nurses and talking about the old leadership of NISNA is that there was a policy prohibiting hospitals from talking with each other. Like they couldn't, they had to go meet, that's what she literally, they had to meet in secret in order to say, we want to develop this coordinated strategy. That happens because of really committed, principled activists who work in a smart way that they're able to actually do that because it's extremely difficult, but it is through building a base of like established and dealing with bread and butter type of on-the-job representational issues is what builds the credibility to allow you to have that base.
Okay, the sister from 1199 in the back.
Hi, I'm Alice Rackle from 1199 SEIU, New York City. One of the things about this workshop is that it's lacking, obviously, in SEIU, and it's not lacking because, you didn't select anybody on the panel. It's lacking because of the role that they haven't played in these types of issues in terms of really mobilizing the workers and really challenging the boss in terms of strikes, work stoppages. Even the old informational picketing hasn't happened in the last 10 years practically. But I really want to say something in terms of what do I really believe are the issues. The wellness campaign is probably the least offensive of the SEIU tactics. I think it really is 4 things that have really contributed to the demise and mobilization and the type of activity that we all long for that were once part of the tradition, for those of us that were part of that tradition in SEIU. I think the first thing is the end of any type of education for organizers, delegates, and rank and file, which really serves to demobilize people because the average person, like you so aptly said, Gabe, doesn't have the same ideas that we have, but can be open to those ideas based on the everyday work that you do. Are they open to a program for socialism? No, but they are open to a program to be able to collectively engage in dialogue and discussion to be able to defend their rights. The second thing is that the labor management project, which is really all-encompassing in terms of an SEIU strategy, in terms of how do you deal with the bosses. The amount of money that's gone into the development of labor management education. That's what delegates and organizers get released for now. I think the third thing is the over-reliance on political action and who are our friends. I mean, obviously, any union that's in the public needs to have some type of relationship with politicians and has to hold politicians accountable. But when your major strategy for gaining things is based on they're gonna support us if we support them. I think those are the things that have really contributed to the demise. I mean, it was really interesting to hear your interpretation of the wellness, because that's actually been, in New York City, one of the best initiatives. Now, we don't fool ourselves. We know that comes from the benefit fund and doing an analysis of the health status of the healthcare workforce, and it tends to be pretty poor. And it's an attempt to be able to control the costs of the benefit fund, both for active workers and for retirees. But it has created somewhat of a culture of a dialogue, and it's those other things that I think that really squashed the type of education, militancy, collective action, and then we have the added thing in New York City in terms of the really bad relations in the hospitals between SEIU and the NISNA people, which also contributes to the lack of unity in confronting the employers, because the nurses are really key. The nurses possess something that the bulk of 1199ers don't possess. Most of us are in abundant supply. They have no trouble filling the majority of the positions of 1199ers. And our strength will be so furtherly enhanced by the collective action and discussion and a collective view in terms of how to confront the bosses. Because the bosses are doing great, the workers aren't.
Okay, before we hear from the next folks on our list, some thoughts on building unity among different healthcare unions, or the labor management partnership trap? Very important points that we just raised. Sandra?
Well, I feel that just to kind of respond to something you brought up about, working with different political views and people maybe not being as politicized as we would expect or we would hope. I felt that working with a lot of the Red Cross workers, who I think were mostly, we would categorize as middle to low income, mostly women and mostly women of color throughout the campaign, I think that sometimes we'll assume that people have a certain kind of politics or that they don't have a certain type of politics. And I felt that when it really came down to it, and we had conversations with people just about, like, what are your issues? Oh, you're not getting to spend time with your kids, and this isn't like a cliche. It was like, the scheduling was just so outrageous that people didn't have control over their lives. Like, we couldn't schedule a meeting for organizing, like 3 weeks out. I mean, imagine trying to, schedule a doctor's appointment or something like that. I felt that, like, the language that people use to convey their problems and to find solutions, like, I would think is very political in a lot of ways, and maybe they wouldn't brand it as like, this is my belief, or they wouldn't use like collective action or any of those words, but I felt that everything that they were doing was inherently political in their viewpoint about, like, this is happening to me and this is happening to other people, and there's no other way to do it unless we all do it. I think those are very, like, radical and political ideas that just emerged out of, like, kind of the fabric of their lives and where they were at as people. So I think sometimes it was helpful for me, like, not to get lost in like branding it with a certain sort of politics or trying to align it with certain politicians or groups, but to really, like, meet people where they're at. I felt like that was helpful.
Far be it for me to bash SEIU, but they totally got rid of the collective bargaining education program. In fact, at some point we started doing our own and then invited other unions to it because there was no training for people on how to do any of that. And as far as wanting to coordinate what we were doing in California with other unions who were part of the other local unions who were part of the same health system chain, that they had no interest in that. In fact, what we found that they were doing is they were taking standards that what we had won in California and trading it off for organizing rights outside of California and behind our back. And that's what they did at Tenet. That's what they did with the nursing home industry. I think that the whole strategy that they're on now is, and they talk about it, and Dennis Rivera is probably the worst practitioner of it, is the purpose of the union is to add value to the employer. And then they can even even after, you know, the Occupy Wall Street movement breaks out, they still use language as the purpose of the union is to add value to the employer. And, you know, I've said this before, our purpose is to extract value from the employer. And if you can't get that fundamental concept on the front end, then I think it's a problem going forward. So, the whole partnership apparatus, and it's not just even the formal partnership of Kaiser, which you know clearly has its problems and has been appropriately critiqued by CNA among others. But it's just the whole approach to labor relations. It's that there really is a class system, and you see it played out in healthcare probably more so now than elsewhere because of the profitability of healthcare. You can see as healthcare employers are taking advantage of what's happening outside of healthcare, come to the bargaining table and demand things that really aren't necessary from their own financial standpoint.
Okay, next on the list is Marty, and the sister here, the brother in the glasses, and then got you. Yeah, go ahead.
What is it with nurses? I think they live from coast to coast. They're the most militant workers we have in this country. Up front are 4 different organizations, and I know of about 8 different nurse unions in this country. And somehow I haven't been able to sort out in my head how they've been very effective, negotiating, striking, organizing, and very ununited as nurses around the country.
What is it? You really want to hear about it? Next year. What is it about? You know, our history is, as professional workers, we were, you know, we were kind of kept barefoot and pregnant for many years. And only in the last, 30 years or so has this been this resurgence, a resurgence of militancy. They grew out of conditions, initially economic, because when I started as a nurse, I was, when I had my daughter, I was eligible for WIC coupons with my salary. Of course, that's changed. Now you have a starting salary in New York City, $70,000 for an associate degree graduate. And there's a shortage, so there are jobs, although that varies. There is the ideological issue about being a professional, and being in a union is against being a professional, and that kind of stuff that goes on. But I think that with the activity that is taking place, even though many of us are not in the same union, people are looking toward what other people do, and I think that brings us together. And I think the same thing is true, around working with other hospital workers. I mean, when people start realizing, when you're building unity, and I do a lot of conflict resolution, because it's not just nurses versus other workers. Nurses hate nurses. The night shift hates the day shift. ER hates the units hate the ICU hates the outpatient hates the inpatient, interventional radiology. I mean, they hate each other. And when I worked nights, I hated the day shift. And I went to the night shift. When I went to the ICU, I hated the people who could send me the patients when I was in the other unit, the ICU. Everybody hates each other because we're all overworked and understaffed. So the question of trying to get into people's minds that all work has dignity, no matter what you do, and trying to build those alliances around the fact that we all have one thing in common: we hate the boss. We all hate the boss. That is true. I never met somebody. If you ask anybody, do you love? I hate my boss. They all say that. So I think that even though we're in different unions, many of us, I think that there is a movement at play for people to start looking at a common solution, common national issues. Getting national ratios, getting a different kind of health system. Those are things that can bridge us. But it's like anything else. You're trying to build, it has to start at the workplace. If the nurses hate each other in their workplace, they're not going to get along with nurses in other unions. You really have to build that mental capacity to understand that we can work together around a common interest. And that's something that the boss pushes one way and we push the other way.
Okay, interesting topic. Long discussion, but we have about 10 minutes left, and we have about 4 or 5 more people who'd like to speak, so I'm going to start calling on more people. Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for participating today. I would like to know how the unions are dealing with racism in the staffing of the unions, and also how is the outreach to youth of color to encourage them to do nursing? So I guess the 3 union people, NUHW, NISNA, and PASNAP. Sandra, I'm going to defer for a minute. I want to hear what they're going to say, and then if you want to chime in, that's great.
Well, in terms of reaching out to bring people of color into the nursing profession, we have a standing operation at Temple University where our members volunteer at two high schools, vocational high schools, to try to recruit predominantly African American students to come into the nursing profession. It's something that they've taken on for quite some time now, and will often volunteer for several hours a week, donating textbooks and just trying to encourage not just the notion of nursing being a rewarding profession, a rewarding job, but also the idea of the understanding of the union and solidarity in that process. And obviously, in terms of staff, we always work aggressively to try to find our staff to reflect the membership that we represent, which is kind of a snapshot of the country.
So what is the percentage on your staff?
Percentage is about 10%.
10% of the staff of the union is people of color who are the reps?
Mm-hmm.
And the other...
Sister, we're not going to be able to grill each one of these organizations. I'm going to let the others
Okay,
respond to
I was
the
just going to
question.
say the antiracist-alliance.com is a great resource in case you're looking for a way to have this conversation and talk about it.
Other unions here respond to this very good question?
I'm not on the staff. I'm a rank and file nurse, so I don't really control the hiring of the staff. But I think that one of the reasons our slate won is because it was diverse. I mean, I think leadership of a union and the staff of a union has to reflect what the membership looks like. And it's not like we purposely sought each other out. We naturally formed our alliance together. The opposition was all white and old. Sorry. We were new. We looked like the people who voted. That's who we were. And that's who we represented, and that came about because we all had a common purpose and came together in a very natural way. And, I'm hopeful that the union, will move in a positive direction. I come from a very corrupt union with a corrupt staff and a corrupt leadership. We're looking, when you do something about that, everything changes. And I think that, I'm very hopeful. I'm nervous because we have elections so often. So you have to run your campaigns, and you're dealing with a big enemy. But I think that when you're honest and you engage in dialogue, you can really grow and deal with all those issues that come up, as long as you're honest and you engage in dialogue and you have a space where people can really say what they think. Because very often what happens is people don't say what they think; they talk about each other. So our goal is to create open and honest dialogue about all of these issues, and I think that issue will be addressed in a very positive way.
So our best method to address issues like that are to recruit members to take positions on staff, and that's become the best vehicle to do that. We've been in a unique situation when we were in SEIU. About 40% of our staff were rank and filers. Since NUHW, there was a time period where we actually weren't paying staff for a while, so it's been hard to get people to leave the job to become a staff person of the union and not paying a salary. But that's now a different situation. So that's again, short answer. That's the best way that we've been able to address that.
Sandra?
Well, I think actually, I feel like the strike we had helped bridge a lot of the racial gaps that we had within our union or in class issues, because our Red Cross local is mostly blood collectors. So these are like phlebotomists. When we first organized, it was about half nurses and half phlebotomists. Now there's like 15 nurses and the rest phlebotomists, because they're really trying to replace nurses. What we're seeing everywhere. But I think that local, just not being nurses and not working in a hospital, and being of a different class and then of different racial backgrounds, in some ways was maybe saw themselves as separate from our overall union as HPAE, which a lot of our things are focused towards nursing and towards nurses, and so there may have been a sense of like alienation, I feel. And just throughout the course of the strike, I feel like it built a lot of solidarity. Like we had one day where we had just like a van full of nurses from up north come down and just like spend their weekend picketing with us on the line, and all of our staff was pretty much involved in the campaign, just in terms of funds and resources and just dollars. We just threw everything we had as a union into that, and I think it built a lot of bridges during the campaign. So I feel like that was a positive experience. Do you guys want to add anything?
Okay, I wish we had time for more follow-up on this, but we have a couple of other hands in 5 minutes before we're going to be evicted.
One last comment before,
Yep, sure.
not on this subject though, just put me
Well,
on
why don't
the
we
list.
why don't we hear from the two other people and then Cal to finish things up. Yep.
My name's Adam Clark. I work for Sandra at HPAE. I just wanted to real quickly something that Jill was saying about, there's a whole industry on replacing nurses who are out on strike. We know about that. It was actually a lockout at Bayonne Medical Center a few years ago where we represent all the staff in the hospital wall to wall. And what we found is there were scabs that were leaving the job because there wasn't anyone to tell them where to find things, right? Because they were all locked out with them. And they actually started calling back some of the job titles of people who did billing, who knew how the computers ran, and that's what broke the lockout. So I mean, that was another powerful thing of sort of maintaining your line.
Hi, my name is Ryan Rogers. I'm with the Workers International League. It seems clear from what the panel said that what is really necessary for the working class is for it to really form into an organization to really forward political aims, because forwarding economic aims in these strikes is wonderful. It's obviously something that should be done, but at the same time, when we look at the broader political structure in the U.S., we're faced with two parties of the rich. I just was curious as to know the thoughts of the panel had on the idea of an independent labor party to fight for the interests of the working class, separate of the Democrats and the Republicans, or the party of the rich and the other party of the rich. Thanks.
Good question. Cal, you want to start off with that, or? Okay. Well, why don't you respond to what you want to say? We've only got a few minutes left, and other people can.
Weren't there other people in front of me?
What's that? No, that's it, unless someone else.
But this is just
all
food
I got
for
on my
thought.
list.
Every time we come back from this, I've only been a couple of times, we come back from this, we say, hey, they don't talk about the environment back there. And just food for thought, I think it might be interesting for people in healthcare to think about making connections with people who are very concerned about the environment, because there is a deep worry amongst many people today about what the future holds for us. And I think that in particular, possibly healthcare people could help shift the environmental and food and wellness issues from the consumerism and kind of neoliberalism that tends to dominate it today to something that was more relevant to more people, to more ordinary people, who I think are concerned, and I'm sure people are concerned here as well, but it is kind of true that we talk about it more out there.
Well, let's go back to the brothers' very challenging question about independent political action. 12 years ago, Joe's union, the California Nurses Association, along with the UE, took a lonely stand in favor of Ralph Nader's third-party candidacy, not something the CNA or many other unions are likely to do this year. So, what is the state of breaking with the two-party system? Any thoughts?
I think it'd be wonderful.
Let's have a vote.
I've been asked to pass this around. No, I mean seriously. I mean, people have noted, John, in strikes, you can't even count on our so-called friends in the Democratic Party unless you twist their arm and drag them to the picket line sometimes.
Look, I mean, I think I'm for it. The fact of the matter is that it won't be real until it's real. When the leadership of the new AFL-CIO leads the charge to form a labor party or key sections of the AFL-CIO, it doesn't do anybody any good to create another small, ineffective political party. But there will come a time when it will be real and it will happen. And I hope I'm alive to see the day.
We did not have time to show Bill's strike video, so maybe that's something people can access by talking to Bill afterwards. Like more, yes, Tim?
One comment on SEIU. My daughter is in SEIU. She got a job in a hospital, and it is what those politics translate into is that there is no union on the ground. Many years ago, I worked in a department store and was in an organizing drive, and my mother was president of the company union. And what my daughter is going through in SEIU is worse than that. It took her months to find out who her delegate was. It took her months to get a glimpse of the contract. The only interaction she had with a union rep, no presence on the ground and abuses run rampant, was when they had a union rep harangue people around upping their political action contributions.
Yeah,
This is what the union does for you. She put down an amount. The rep gave her a lecture and handed her back the card and said, "Now you think about what I just said." And up your contribution. Absolutely, absolutely no union on the ground.
It has been suggested that we need subway information on Ellen's flyer here, if anybody knows.
Is it the
What's
2
the
to
nearest
Chambers
subway
Street?
stop for West Street? Is that